Good evening. Sorry for the technical set. Must have been a long day for you, so I will try to keep it exciting and also try to take you on a journey about interaction. Unfortunately, it's a presentation from me to you, so there is not much interaction while I'm doing it, but afterwards, please ask me questions as much as you want. Firstly, I will introduce our firm very quickly. We are a partnership of 10. We work globally. Both Rem Koolhaas and myself oversee the operation worldwide, and all the other partners are working in the regions we are: Americas, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Australia. In other words, we cover most of the world, and all our offices are concentrated about one line so that communication is constant and fast. We're not only an architectural office. We think about architecture and buildings, about cities, but we do a lot of other things because we think that architects, when they limit themselves to the built environment, will not be able to give arguments or answers to what we need to do, namely a social responsibility. In other words, with OMA, we are real, we do, we act, we build, we change, we write manifestos, and we are reactive. With AMO, we are virtual, we think, we reflect, not per se build, we observe, write manifestos, and are very proactive. Some buildings that probably everybody knows that I'm not going to talk about today. CCTV, which is an institutional building, kind of our own hometown, new city hall, a combination of 1600 architecture. And today in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, the Porto Concert Hall, a cultural building, the first cultural building with a window to the city, where interaction would be even possible while a performance was going on, and also a lot of educational facilities around the world, because that's where we educate people for interaction. Here in Finland, you might know us for this project in Helsinki, Priscilla 1, which should go under construction in about 2 years from now. With AMO, we think about many topics. This is energy. We made the energy master plan for Europe, connecting all the elements instead of having every country be self-sufficient, make a whole of Europe communicate, work together, interact, and there where there's cold, bring it to the warmth. Where there's warmth, bring it to the cold. Where there's sunshine and where there's water and wind, exchange. We also work for a fashion brand called Prada. You all are familiar with our work, I think, there, but we also do all their advertisement, and this is a recent one where we say you should be proud to be copied. And then lastly, we constantly analyze, write about what we see and what we do. This is the book of the last Biennale in Venice last year, where all the partners took one of the main subjects of architecture or elements of architecture and gave it their own ideas and their own kind of embodiment of these elements, and then we all combined it to one book. I was responsible for the roof and the stairs. Now to the subject, interaction. In the past, buildings were a representation of the society. That is where the society came together and where everybody could be equal, or where everybody was able to interact no matter status. Architects were building for discovery. People needed to find their ways in cities and were not pre-programmed. Here in Night on the Earth, a famous movie, it's shown that somebody can explore the world through their own eyes, but only through encounters, not per se through the buildings or the perception of these buildings. However, since 1984, when these two people came together, our society changed significantly. This was the declaration of the market economy, and since then architecture is not social anymore. It doesn't have a social responsibility. It became a marketing tool. Why are you laughing? It's the truth. People are also not programmed anymore to explore, to do things they shouldn't do, or try to find things they want to do on their own. We're all programmed, we're all watched, and we're constantly guided into a direction that is actually extremely boring. You can imagine that this guy is exploring the skyline with clean underwear in his suitcase. I don't know about you, but for me that doesn't sound attractive at all. Architecture is supposed to create dreams at this moment. We need to be able to live together on top of each other, we need to have a swimming pool, and we need to have tennis, or whatever other thing. But by doing so, it creates an unbelievable amount of exclusions right next to each other. Is that something we want to cater to, or do we have a larger responsibility? I will show you now 4 projects of OMA in which we constantly work with the notion of interaction and bringing people together through a building, not through architecture. First, the project that I'm doing completely myself, the Tampere Performing Arts Center, that is currently under construction. A project that is meant to be ugly, but meant to bring people together as a machine. In 2008, we were asked to participate in a competition, an open competition, which OMA normally never participates in, for the Tampere Performing Arts Center. It was on the Schilling night market. Probably none of you have ever been there, but it is a super exciting place. It's where everybody of the city comes together in the evening on a night market that doesn't exist during the day. People eat whatever you can eat. Most I would not dare to eat. And they buy everything that they need to buy as cheap as possible. It's the real culture of a city. It's where people come to life. It's also very structured and well set up so that people can find their way. It's an exciting environment that caters for everything you want, and you can also choose your own flavor. However, the competition asked us to remove all that and build a theater like in Beijing, 3 theaters next to each other, and create a domain for the exclusive rich that go to the theater. We decided to participate because we thought it was morally wrong. 134 entries from all around the world. And what did they do? All of them eliminated that night market. All architects responded to the brief and wanted to build that next theater. We didn't. As I said, we thought it was immoral, and we wanted to keep that real culture of the city in the heart. And if there needs to be something like high culture with it, that needs to be somewhere in the same surroundings. We could only think about a model that would be above it, actually protect it from weather and sun, and coexist with it at all time. Our main inspiration was this dish that combined 3 things seamlessly together, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but I don't see any difference between the 3 parts. And we thought that was actually a good idea. Why would we not combine 3 theaters seamlessly together and don't put them next to each other, save a lot of space, and therefore save the night market? This was the diagram represented. The 3 theaters kind of very clear with their back of house and their backstages, side stages, and then at the edges, the theaters where people sit together, hanging from the center cube. They were bound together, interacting was possible, therefore we could reach an enormous high efficiency and reduce the program by about 30%. This was the model that I was walking around with at all time. It is this size, which has the cube, the 3 theaters hanging from it above the night market, and then the West Towers grabbing it and pulling it to the ground with all its catering and delivery services. This was the render that we presented during the competition. A night market there and a building above it. Clear theaters present. And this is the building site today. In other words, they decided for this proposal, but it was outside of the brief. Why did they choose for this proposal? It could be politically extremely vulnerable to do so. However, during the competition, the people of Taipei created a riot. They more or less took over centers of the city and said, we're not going to allow this to happen. And this was a good way out for the mayor. Namely, you could say, I can have my theater and can be re-elected, and you can have your night market, and we combine it together. It's not per se beautiful, as I already said. People in Taipei refer to it as the stinky tofu and the 1,000-year rotten egg. But everybody is looking forward to the building arriving. And here you see kind of one of these theaters hovering above the space of the night market, where later all these stalls will be put back. You walk from that night market seamlessly over a square into the building, where it is very utilitarian and everybody is allowed to go. You don't need to have a ticket yet at this entry point. You can walk all the way up to the lobby from where the 3 theaters get born from, and only there you need to show your ticket when you go into one of these 3 theaters. The first theater is the multi-perform theater. It's about 600 people and it has a flexible setup. And you see there is a big stair where your ticket gets checked, and then you get into the space which is a folded plane. And because we folded the plane, we were able to make a very efficient theater that saves another 20% of space. It has all kinds of setups that you can imagine, and it caters for opera and it caters for drama. Here you see the current planes as it is on the building site. And this is kind of the view how it is going to be in the future. We were in a lucky circumstance that for this building we could also do the whole interior design, which made it a total design from both out and inside. And here another view to the proscenium. This will be the stage later on. Then the flexible theater, which is a black box theater with a flat floor that can cater for all kinds of different performances, from dance to experimental theater to lectures. And it has a double shell in which people move to their seats and people can have a drink after ticket control. And here you see that space that is in between the 2 facades, more or less. A gap that we created for the people. As I said, it has all kinds of setups. In Taipei, experimental theater is huge because in China, of course, people cannot express themselves completely. And here in Taipei, that created an underground culture that says everything about China and that is possible. It's first tested in Taipei, and then if people like it or the idea, then it is even brought into the mainland. So there are huge theater makers that work from Taipei and are going to use this theater as their home theater. And this is the current state, so you can see that the blue color is already starting to appear. The good thing was that we found if we put these theaters not next to each other, but together, we could maybe even physically connect them and create new theater setups for theater plays that normally end up in old factory buildings or even in public spaces because they are too large in a setting. By combining these two theaters that I just showed you, we can create a stage of 100 meters in length, 40 meters in width, 30 meters in height, and there can be 3,800 people looking at the stage from all sides. In the most efficient theater possible, 30% smaller than the asked brief. And here you see how that could happen with a setup, and here you see a render again from the competition, and this will be really realized. So interaction is not only a matter of what happens into one cell, but it is also a matter between the cells. Then the last theater, the proscenium playhouse, that's the round rotten egg on the outside. You take escalators to it, you end in its underbelly, right underneath the theater, which is the foyer. Then again you move, this is a picture of how that will look like. This is a hall, this is the hall of the escalator, and you really end up on a round platform. And then between the shell of the theater and the facade, again you move up to your space. Here you see how that currently looks, the stairs and the platforms. And then you end up into its belly, the round theater. It's a dense theater, that's why it can be round. The acoustics can be tuned. It is not about reflection here, it's about taking it away. And here you see how then people sit on a plane and in the boxes in the shell. This is the current situation, a very intimate, small space, but it caters for about 900 people to watch a dance. Then there was another challenge. How do you combine that low culture of the night market and that so-called high culture of the theater? We created through the building a loop that people don't need a ticket for and still can experience everything about theater making. So you go in through a separate entrance, you go with an escalator up. This is that escalator that takes you straight through. You come through the technical grid of the two combined theaters. In other words, you really walk in between the layers of the technical grid and the ceiling. You can look down and see the people sit, watch a theater show. And then you go up through a cafe to a public viewing deck that is at the top of the cube. From there, this is the current state, you can see the famous palace where Obama stays when he comes, and hopefully also the Finnish Prime Minister when he arrives there. You go also through the proscenium playhouse through a separate galley from which you can look into the theater and even see the theater play without a ticket. There will be glass there, so you cannot interact with what is happening inside, but you can see it and you can hear it. And this is that window in its current state. It's a little bit under an angle, but you see the stage downstairs. The building is very utilitarian, and what we thought was very important was to reveal all elements of theater making and actually hide all the people sitting together. So the facade is fully transparent at the cube, and it is fully blocked there where the people sit. In other words, it's not about providing view from the people that can buy the ticket. No, it's about providing view in for the people that are in the public space. The good thing about Asia is that you can mock up these things. So we thought about it, but we were not sure how it would work. So we built it one-on-one on an industrial site to test it. And this is the mock-up where we were testing the different elements together. As I said, the cube is fully made out of corrugated glass. It's load bearing, so the slabs are 7 meters high and about 1.5 meters wide, and there's no substructure, so it carries fully itself. And here you see at the current building site the installment of it, which gives a very interesting view from both inside and outside. It distorts the view of what happens behind it. And then the aluminum facade on the 3 volumes, it's kind of welded together and then grinded and bead blasted so that all the seams will be gone. It will more or less be seamless from a far distance. And here you see first tests of different angles. A lot of people like to understand the building. This was a site visit only 2 weeks ago, where Rem and I were able to show Toyo Ito and Chris Xiao, 2 very well-known Asian architects, through the building to understand and explain it. As I said, this is kind of one of the pictures of the steel structure, and this is how it is today, because they are putting the facade on, and in January we hope that the facade is completed, and at that moment they will take away the building site. So everything is currently moved inside the cube already, including the materials for the finishing, and the public space will be given back while the building is not finished yet to the night market from March onwards. So the building site is above and the people are under it. They can really experience it. Although ugly, people start liking the building, and this is local art that we start finding in which our building is already celebrated. Let's hope that will be the reality soon. Another project that shows how we deal with interaction. Interaction between people, but also interaction between old and new. Existing culture and new culture. Do you replace things or do you let them be in symbiosis? This is the garage building in Gorky Park, one of the main public spaces in Russia. Was very important in the Soviet era, where all people working in the industrial sites around it gathered in the park when they had a little bit of free time and or had lunchtime. And these buildings were given to us, but they are really ruins, and that we were asked to make a museum out of them, a museum for modern art. We started with the square building, and it was actually the canteen of all these industrial buildings around it, so this is where the workers went for their lunch. This is how we found it, completely into pieces, but some very beautiful pieces of Soviet building still inside, mosaics, tiles, and the client said, maybe just take everything away except the structure and then make a new building around it. Instead of doing that, we analyzed the movement through the park, which is actually blocked by this building and the inaccessibility of this building currently. These are the main directions through the park, and because the building is there, they cannot happen. So we thought our building should cater for that public route and simply have the route straight through 24/7. We also said we want to keep everything we found, except of the rubbish, of course, and we just create a new shell and a new interior in symbiosis with that. Here you see that shell, and you see the 2 large doors that go open, and that's exactly that route that we should show. And these doors are open, and people can just move through them also when they don't go to the museum. And here you see a picture of our model that we built, in which we convinced our client with. Here you see the reality. It was finished kind of only 2 months ago. Maybe you have seen some publications. Here you see the people gathering through, and you see that the opening is heavily used. And there's a public space again on the side of the city where people can gather and move into the park. Programmatically, this meant something for the building because we could not make it exclusive to the people that go to the museum anymore. We needed to have space which you can move through at all times. And that's the research and education part of the building, and that is accessible for everybody. And then the exhibitions and the projects, if you want to visit that, you need to go there. Very similar to Centre Pompidou in Paris, for example. So you enter through that gate, which you can go through at all times. And here you see then you can move into the spaces that are more private, and that goes step by step. And you also see that in the interior we kept everything that we found. So these green tiles are still original, and also these bricks are still original of the structure. And we didn't do anything to them, we just kept them to tell their story. And here you see that we also kept the mural. This is the press conference at the opening, where the client and us are behind a lecture. And actually that mural that was there, we didn't do anything to, was the backdrop for the launch of this building. In other words, what has been there is potentially and probably the most beautiful part of the culture of the place. And here you see again another shot, and here you see then the new circulation that we injected in it. Very minimal interior interventions, except when you go into the private part where you have all the galleries. We intervened significantly and even worked with artists to make art pieces for this building. This is the night, to also show you that at night you can still move through that building. It's not a joke. Then 2 projects under planning. First, the Axel Springer campus in Berlin. It's kind of a counterpart of Silicon Valley in the center of Berlin. It needs to be the combination of all the media of the Springer company. And this is Matthias Dopfner, the CEO of the company, and this is the start conference of the competition. We were competing against our own peers, namely Big and Ole Sheeran, which was a kind of interesting competition. The only reason to be there is to communicate. And he showed us 2 images of what communication was and what communication currently is. This was the image that he said this was communication in the past. This is not what we want anymore. And this is communication now. And this is what we want to enlarge and have. We were not sure if we understood this completely, because I don't think that the society can live like this. It's potentially a little bit too democratic, and probably nobody will take a decision other than a kind of eureka that nobody understands. So we wanted to show that probably all kinds of communication need to be possible, and not only one singular modern idea of communication. Another sentence of the brief was, we are looking for radical proposals, radical modern, radically visionary, and yes, radically beautiful. Things that are not often combined. And it needs to be timeless and stunning and inspire people and products. As an architect, you immediately kind of question what is this actually, and how do I respond to it? Because the moment I have responded, it's outdated. So it's just an idea of 1 or 2, or maybe in our case 10, but it would never hold this statement for very long. So we came up with a building that maybe was a question to them. How do we read this? And this was an image that we showed them. More or less a block, an extrusion of the site with a big hole in the middle with a transparency. And our argumentation was we create a center where everybody can be visible, where everybody can be, but we also create 4 corners where they can retreat and come up with their own ideas, and not per se adheres to you as CEO, but they can find their own habitat and work in their own environment. So the site, we put a diagonal. That diagonal, by the way, is exactly where the Berlin Wall was, which made this project a little bit more delicate as well. So we didn't want to build any substance there again. We just wanted to keep it open. It's also, again, a public route through the building. You can just come through. Then we built up the two sites with kind of the intimate spaces and towards the valley, the public spaces. And we just mirrored it on the top. It's exactly a copy from the bottom. Put on top, have the same things, and that's the building. And here you see it, the 4 different worlds of which they can create their own habitats. The valley, that is the open communication source in the building, and then the newsroom that reports about both right in the middle. And this is the program. Why do I show a program bar, which is normally a bit boring in a lecture? It's important to say, so they wanted that all open communication, but then 70% of their program were actually spaces that were determined and were private. So how did that combine? Almost impossible. So what we did is we put this 70% of the program in these 4 domains where they can be, where can people make them, and then we created the openness in between. In other words, the formal office versus the informal office, 80 to 20%. And we thought that was already very radical in many buildings. And here you see how that distribution happens. And also in a floor plan, you see that both are always there at the same time in different configurations at every level. So exploration is still possible, but the division is the same. So very conventional ways of working versus very new ways of working. Straight next to it, presentations with an overview to the valley and in an informal setting versus very formal meeting rooms. As I said, the ground plane of the building is completely open and accessible to anybody. And you can move through the building because there's a rooftop bar and even a pool on the top where everybody can go. So this is how you would enter it. You see that valley on both sides. If you come up, you see that valley extend, and then if you even further, you can look down onto it. This was the model that we brought to the final presentation, and it was key that this model could be opened so that they could see both halves and also the functioning of the building in the inside. The facade of the building is a direct reference to Mies. This is a kind of a very famous drawing on the one side. It's the other side of the street, and our building on the other side. And we mimicked that drawing in our facade. A very formal, controlled facade for the formal offices. Here you see how that will look from the inside. And then a very informal, free, however, again, self-load-bearing facade without substructure in the openings that is completely transparent. And that will look like this, or when you're under it, like this. We are still not sure if this won us the competition against Big and Ole Sheeran. We also suspect that we were the party that had most fun with this project and didn't take it too serious, what they all said in the brief. However, we took one thing very serious. It needs to be stunning, beautiful, so that we have a car accident in front of the building. This was a little briefing to us. And this was our opening render of the presentation. Maybe that got us the job. Another way of interaction, not taking yourself too serious, and sometimes also provoke to what others think is already decided. Then the last project, a project of our American office, which is about a boundary between public space and building. It's a bridge. It's a bridge in Washington. It is a project that we won quite recently and that we hope start building next year. It's on the river in Washington, D.C., an area that is completely not inhabited at the moment. And it is between the old city of Washington and its outpost, where it was protected against everybody that wanted to invade it. Actually, it was never invaded, or it was not even ever threatened, which is maybe interesting. And it is also at a crossroads between the rich part of town and actually the cheap part of town. And they want to make a bridge in between. They want to bring the richness of entertainment and retail to the other side, and they want to bring the arts and culture from the other side into the city. And these were diagrams that we drew out of the brief. And what we thought was interesting is to kind of simply take that literally. We come from the capital with one arm, we come from the neighborhood from the other, we intersect them and we extend them towards each other so that they really reach out. And that became the diagram of our bridge. From the capital, from the neighborhood, and intersected. And that intersected part could become not only an infrastructural point, but actually a meeting point, an interaction point from one side to the other. And this was then one of the Rhino models that we had in the early stages when we were designing it. We also looked at all the events that are happening in Washington and that actually are always into one specific area and never into the whole city or never connected between the neighborhoods. And we thought maybe our bridge could be also a connector not only from one side to another, but also for these different events. So we programmed the bridge in such a way that these events can actually partly help there. And with the diagram that was actually quite easy, because through intersecting it, we could create shade places, we could create exposed places, we could create places with view, we could create places where people can stay, like cafes, performance spaces, and even education spaces. And as I said, it can be spaces that are sheltered or exposed, private or very public. And then this was the render that we presented. If you want, you can go from A to B straightforward, but you can also linger around and experience what can happen on a bridge. And here you see another render of the competition. And from here you see that you can look to the vast area of the city. And from the other side you can see the Capitol and the National Monument and the fireworks and New Year's if you want to. The bridge was programmed with all kinds of historical installations referring to the history of the city, which was of course very important in the political involvement of the system of America towards kind of a united country, towards the rights of black, towards the rights of women. And all these things we try to combine through educational programs. And at the same time, we asked artists to work with us. How can this bridge constantly change its identity and be different from every single angle? This is a very famous American artist that created a light installation that changes during the seasons. So it's very slow, so you will almost not notice it. But people that are always living there, of course, will experience that that bridge is never fixed. If you only go once, it's a fixed installation. And here you see kind of how the bridge is programmed, a straightforward connection, but also all kinds of spaces that can be used for interaction by people. Wintertime, of course, cold with the spaces. And we thought, again, to have some fun, and in the competition we presented maybe this place can become more important for Washington than the Capitol. And therefore we ended with this slide. And that's also where I will end today. Thank you very much.